Now, just a couple words of introduction about tonight's bona fide rock star of the poetry world, Edward Hirsch. He's a celebrated poet and a tireless advocate for poetry. Among his numerous prizes and recognitions, he's received the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Pablo Neruda Presidential Medal of Honor, the National Jewish Book Award, and many, many others. He's extraordinarily prolific in multiple genres. This is the book we're going to be talking about. If you look, the whole front is all his previous works. It takes up the full page. I'll just give you a little rundown. Get this, 10 books of poetry, including The Living Fire, New and Selected Poems, Gabriel, a poem, a book-length elegy for his son, and Stranger by Night. He's also published 8 books of prose, including the national bestseller, How to Read a Poem and Fall in Love with Poetry. Also, 100 Poems to Break Your Heart, and The Demon and the Angel, Searching for the Source of Artistic Inspiration. He has also served as editor for 6 major collections of poetry. If that's not enough, he's taught at universities, and since 2003, he's been president of the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. Simply extraordinary. I'm not sure when he sleeps. And just a few words about this really singular, amazing new book. It's a startling memoir. It's titled My Childhood in Pieces, which the author also refers to as a Skokie Elegy and a stand-up comedy book, a stand-up comedy. So Bookhouse has copies for sale. After you hear our conversation, I know you're going to laugh a lot. I hope you got your copy. We'll have a signing afterwards. You can line up against this wall. Mr. Hirsch said he would be happy to inscribe or personalize books as well. And at the end, I'll leave time for questions. We'll have a microphone to bring around. Just raise your hand. We'll bring it right to the audience. So a couple words of why I think you really need this book in your life. You'll laugh. You'll cry. You may require stitches because it's guaranteed that you will be busting a gut. I was laughing so hard at points, no joke, I literally spit out my coffee on more than one occasion. Then there are stretches where a knot rose in my throat and I brushed back tears. It is deeply moving and authentic, and did I mention hilarious? As you would imagine, the language is lyrical, bears this poet's soul with introspection and tenderness and astonishing wordplay at every turn. Edward Hirsch can sniff out a pun from a mile away. It is unlike any memoir you've ever read. It's written in short scenes that land like a stand-up comic's punchlines or like a mean right hook. Everything is fragmented and askew and keeps you off balance like you're inside a cubist painting. The title does double duty as well. These are brief pieces of a life and a family that was forever falling to pieces. Hirsch manages to create that rare alchemy on the page where the author has the reader roaring with laughter through the pain and pathos. He's was a not quite middle-class Jewish kid who grew up in Skokie, Illinois, but it's a universal coming-of-age story about love, loss, regret, redemption, and warning to all the children out there, lots and lots of teenage sex, attempted sex in cars, car seats, sexus interruptus when his parents come home early. It's getting a little warm in here, I know. It's gonna be a spicy conversation, but you know, it's got all those big themes. But don't take my word for it. A couple people you might have heard of. Scott Simon on NPR called it haunting, engrossing, and often a hoot. Chicago Tribune said My Childhood in Pieces reads like remembering itself, a recounting of 50s and 60s suburban Chicago, the bursts of memory, jokes, dialogue, stray images. It's a lot of fun, gathering steam with poignancy that wallops. And the Washington Post called it a hilarious, poignant memoir from a wonderful, generous writer. I could go on, but I think it's high time to begin our conversation. I did forget one thing about Edward Hirsch. He is a MacArthur Fellow. They call that the Genius Grant. We're in the company of a genius tonight. Please give a warm, loud, raucous Albany welcome to Edward Hirsch. I'm already getting a little warm. That's a spicy book, Edward.
I'm all worked out.
We're going to hear about some of these stories.
I'm all worked out.
So, thank you for being here, coming up from Brooklyn on the train. Can I call you Ed?
Please do.
Ed, all right, man. You are no stranger to the Writers Institute. You were here in 2001, 2014. How does it feel to be back in Albany?
Ecstatic.
We told you he's funny. There's a lot of, yeah. Anyway, we do share things in common with the city of your birth, Chicago, a great democratic political machine, and we'll probably touch on that later. So do you want to dive right in?
Let's go.
All right. So you start the book with this prologue, which I love. You write this: my grandparents taught me to write my sins on paper and cast them into the water on the first day of the new year. They didn't expect an entire book. And then all these beautiful stories and punchlines in between. And the epilogue, one sentence. Czesław Miłosz claims that once a writer is born into a family, the family is finished. So you say in the acknowledgments, you couldn't have written this book when your three parents, which we'll talk about, were alive. You call it a threefold apology. Can you talk about the motivation for this memoir?
Thanks for the very generous introduction. So glad to be here with all of you. Thank you for coming. My mother died when I was 69. She had a long, really sad dementia and illness, and I mourned for a year, as you do, and it hit the pandemic. And during the pandemic, I was writing a book about American poetry called The Heart of American Poetry. But I had more time than I usually do. No meetings, no commuting. And for some reason, towards the end of the year, I just started writing down things my mother had said. And then what other people said. So the first thing I wrote was, I was 8. I said to my mother, you know, you really shouldn't make fun of me, you're my mother. And she said, don't be so sure, kid. And then I remembered that I was in high school, I was studying the Enlightenment, and I said to my mom, you know, I'm studying the Enlightenment, that's the study of universal truths. And she said, you want a universal truth? Women like shoes. And I said to my dad, you know, do you think there's such a thing as common sense reasoning? And he said, yes, you don't have it. And then my first father, so I just started literally writing down things they said. So my first father, I remembered something that he said. He had a riddle. What's a cosigner? A schmuck with a pen. And he had a sign on his desk that said, all I want is an honest advantage. And he had a lot of sayings about food, like a bagel is a delivery system for cream cheese. Don't order white bread on a sandwich. If someone orders white bread, you know their family came over on the Mayflower. And this led me, so I just was literally remembering what they said. And then I thought, what happens if I take some of the things that happened, like anecdotes, and tell them in the same way? So one with my grandmother, I was 7, I think, and a girl named Roberta was going to hit my sister, Leanie, with a broom handle. And I stepped forward to stop this from happening. And so Roberta hit me with the broom handle. And so blood was spurting everywhere. So I ran home holding my head, screaming, my brains are falling out, my brains are falling out. My mother was divorced, my grandmother was taking care of us, and she took my sister Leanie and me by the hand, she got her purse, we went outside, got a cab, we're getting in the cab, she said, "You don't have the brains you're born with. I don't see how anything can start falling out now." And then I remembered that she said to me once, "If I had a brain sale, I'd charge the most for yours." And I say, "Why? Because I'm the smartest one in the family?" "No, because yours have never been used."
What great, I mean, you had so much source material.
So this is how it started. I just literally was writing down the things they said.
Did you ever do stand-up comedy or want to be a stand-up comic? Because it is, and we'll get into the form, which is very unusual. I've never seen a memoir like it. But did you want to? In that household, you must have had to be a bit of a stand-up comic.
I once said to my mom, I asked her if she ever wanted to go to see the Borscht Belt comics and see stand-up comedy, and she said, "I don't see why. I have a family." So I never really, I always liked telling jokes, and actually I don't like jokes so much as just stories and punchlines, but no, I never, it wasn't an ambition.
But these are very short, some call them like micro stories, micro anecdotes, and then each one has a witty, sort of doing double duty headline or heading. How did you come up with this style?
Once I started writing down the things that I've been telling you, and poems and jokes have a lot in common this way, they turn. And I like the tightness of this, where everyone turns. There's a sort of setup, a situation, and then a turn or a zinger. My family was really good at the zingers. And I found that when I started doing it myself, my childhood started opening up to me. And so I just kept doing it. I just kept, first it was just, it's just straight recollection, and then I began to fill it in. But we all have a vault of family stories. And so at first I was just writing them all around. One story that I knew my whole life was my mother's younger sister, my Auntie B, always told me this story. She goes, I started to sob when I saw you in the nursery, Auntie B said. I'd never seen such a strange-looking infant. You were all eyes and nose, and your face trailed behind. You were emaciated. Your hair was spiky. You looked like you were born in an alley. And then when I was writing the book, I put the next one, family resemblance. All my life, people have said that I look like B. So it was that move. Yeah. It was the move from the anecdote to the comment. And that what happened to me was when I started writing these, I realized that I could keep the structure even when the pieces weren't funny. Even when or a lot of it is dark humor. But many of them are not even meant to be funny, but they kept the same punch. And I liked it. And so I just liked the punch, and it just basically kept going. And then I found I could get another bite by putting the title in, by giving each one a title, a slight nod to what it is. And so each one became its own entity. And for a long time I was just writing these, and then at a certain point I began to realize that I could put them together in some kind of, and it created a kind of narrative, and that I found they were a little addictive. Like you'd want to know right from the next to the next to the next, and they'd build. But it gave me a lot of flexibility for comments and remarks.
Who are your stand-up or comedy heroes?
In the book I say my mom loved Mel Brooks. My dad liked Red Skelton. Red didn't stand a chance. I like Lenny Bruce. And I said that my Aunt Idell was a lot like him.
My copy is like turned down pages, dog-eared. Every page just had me rolling, laughing. I'll throw out a couple. I'll tee up a couple of the.
Okay.
The importance of your grandmother's pull-down Murphy bed.
Okay, you're just.
I promise this is going to be spicy. It's all adult content here. I think.
You're troublesome.
Going right to it, man.
You're trouble. My grandmother my grandmother raised, really, my parents got divorced when I was 2, they separated when I was 2, and they went together in 7th grade, and then they went together in high school. They got married when they're 20. They had me when they were 22. They had my sister when they were 23, and then they got divorced. So my grandmother did a lot, raised us a lot. So there's a lot in my book about my grandmother, who was very, very tough, very old school. But when I was older, my grandmother lived in a studio apartment, and I asked her if I could borrow the apartment to study in. And she was so nice, and she gave it to me. And she had a Murphy bed. That was a Murphy bed she used to babysit for us. Sometimes we sleep at her house. We sleep in the Murphy bed with her because it was just a studio. And the story you're teeing me up is that I got the key to her apartment. You know, when you're in high school, the main thing is where you're going to go with your girlfriend. Like, that's really a serious issue. And so my grandmother, I could watch her go to the L to go to work 3 Sisters, and then I would go in with my girlfriend. And so what I say is I lost my virginity the old-fashioned way, in grandmother's bed.
But
Yeah.
That's the turn, right?
Yeah, that's the turn.
Kicker, man.
That's the turn, yeah. You're jumping ahead a little.
We're jumping ahead. I got some serious questions too, but let me give you one more. Your sister goes into the nightstand in your parents' bedroom. You finish the story.
Okay, my sister goes in my parents' bedroom, and she sees that she calls them water bombs, and they're in packages. So she opens the package. She goes, "This is cool." So we get the water bombs out, and we fill them with water, and then we start throwing water bombs into the street till our parents come home, and we find out that the water bombs are meant for some other
for grandmother's bed.
For grandmother's bed, yeah. For grandmother's.
I mean, you had me laughing, but it's so heartbreaking. It turns too. That turn comes unexpectedly with the heartbreak. But you dedicate the book, and I mean, your sister, Leanie, is a amazing sister, and she's kind of the emotional heart and anchor of that book, and you honor her. But what does Leanie mean to you? And then your younger sister, Nancy, much younger, but you dedicate the book to them, and this follow-up's going to be, what's been their response so far?
My sister Leanie and I, we have different fathers. My sister Leanie and I have one father. My sister Nancy has another father. Nancy's 8 years younger. So my sister Leanie and I went through everything together. She's kind of the ballast in the book. But one of the things that's been very striking to me, and to her too, really, is that in the acknowledgments, I say that, because my book is dedicated to both my sisters, and I say that, first of all, if you're going to write a memoir, I highly recommend having a sister who goes through psychoanalysis. It's a very good idea, because she remembers everything. So what I say is my sister Leanie and I share a sense of humor, and she's vetted my stories, but she has a different take on it. She considers our childhood as traumatic. I prefer to recall it otherwise. Her way was more expensive. It required psychoanalysis. And everyone who's interviewed me on the radio or anything like that for podcasts, everyone has picked up on this. And it's been striking to us because it's an acknowledgement. But I think the acknowledgement there is that as you're reading my book, you feel the trauma peeking through. And you feel the loss, and you feel that, but you're aware the turn is humorous, but the humor is dark. So I think that the tell about my sister is that there's another way to interpret this. There's another way to see this, and that I'm turning it in a certain way it's the only way I could manage it, the only way I could come to terms with it, I suppose, and it enabled me to write about it. So, but I think that my sister's way is different. It's quite good for me because she remembers everything, but she doesn't think any of it is funny. So she'd say, "You can't make this funny." And then I go, "Give me 15 minutes." So like, here's an example. When she was 8, she was 7, she was in, I guess, no, 6.5, she was in bed for a year. And at the end, she got interested in nursing. And so she said to my mom, "I want to become a nurse." And my mom said, "Jewish girls can't become nurses." So my sister Leni goes, "You can't make that funny." I go, "Give me 15 minutes." So I called her back and I said, "Poor Deborah, wet nurse of Rebecca, mother of Jacob. If we're up to my mom, she never would have made it into Genesis." So she goes, "That's pretty funny."
That's good.
She goes, "That's pretty funny." So
one of the longest sections, I'm going to swerve again to something very serious. It's a heartbreaking part of the book. And I'm wondering, is there anything off bounds with humor? This is when you're in the courtroom with your sister Leni. You started life as Rubenstein, and it's heart-wrenching, but you put it all out there. Describe that scene. You don't try to make it funny because it's horrible. It's traumatic.
It doesn't. It's not turned to be. The only thing that's funny is my sister. Before I enter this section with my sister's favorite word, Zugzwang, and it means the same thing in life as it does in chess. You have to make a move, but every move makes your situation worse. So the story you're talking about is when just to get us there, my biological father, first we called him Dad, then we called him Daddy Ruby, then we didn't call him anything, and then we just called him Ruby. And my second father, first we called him Kurt, then we called him Uncle Kurt, then we called him Daddy Kurt, then we called him Dad. So when my mother, before this, I have to tell you a funny story.
Please do.
Yeah, okay. So Ruby would introduce us to different dates he had who he would call his wives. And so we met his wife, Pat. And we went back and told our mom that we met Pat. We met his new wife, Pat. And she said, that's not his wife, that's a prostitute. So we said, "What's a prostitute?" She goes, "A prostitute is someone your dad pays to touch him." So I went to the playground the next day. I go, "Hey everyone, what's a prostitute?" No one knows. I go, "That's a woman my dad pays to do stuff to him." So that's the humor. Okay. So when my mother remarried to Kurt Hirsch, we found out she got married, by the way, because when she came home, she said, "Call him Dad now." But we weren't very attentive because one day she came home and she had a new baby and we hadn't noticed she was pregnant. So my mom married Kurt Hirsch and we moved to Skokie, and she told us that our last name should be Hirsch because a family should all have one name. So one day we brought our report card. You do what your parents say. So we had our report cards and we brought them to Ruby because we were proud of our good grades. And he saw that our last name was Hirsch, and he started yelling at us. And the next thing we knew, this is the trauma of my childhood breaks apart over this. I tell the story in the book. Ruby, the next thing we knew, Ruby had sued my mom and sued us about our last name, and we went to court. And the court scene that you're describing was Ruby was sitting on one side, and we're sitting on the other side, my mom, my sister Leni, and me. I was 10, and Leni was 9. And then the judge called us in and asked us to choose which our last name should be. And so we didn't want to choose. We didn't know what to do. And he turned to my sister and she said, "I'll take whatever name he takes." I had an idea. I thought it was pretty good, actually, that we could hyphenate our name, which seemed to me ahead of our time, but they didn't like that idea. So then the next thing I know, my mom went in for a long time, then she came out, and then Ruby came in for a long time, and he came out, And then the judge had ruled, we left. And he drove us back to our house in Skokie. We were all crying. The case had gone against him. And he started screaming at us, "You've betrayed me. You're not my children anymore. I'm leaving town. You're dead to me." And then we said, "If you don't want to see us anymore, we don't want to see you either." And so he went back to his new wife, Beverly, and said, "Can you believe it? They said to me they don't want to see me anymore." And she said, "Well, then we should move." And so they moved to California. And he was out of our lives then. So it kind of sort of breaks apart.
Thanks for telling that. I wanted to share the history, but
But
did you ever try to make it funny in early drafts and you just couldn't? Is that
No.
one part that's out of bounds of humor? It's so
It's not
hard to
I don't
read.
think anything is out of bounds, but I didn't try to make it funny. But I am thinking of something funny now, though, telling you this.
Oh yeah, let's hear it.
This is it's not in my book, but when I was going around with how to read a poem, my mom was still alive. My mom and dad were still alive. They came to a bookstore. And when I was talking about the book, my mom started going like this. It's like very distracting. There are like 30 people, and my mom's going like this. So finally I go, "Mom, what's going on?" She goes, "Oh, honey, you're giving too much away. No one's going to buy your book." I'm also remembering something funny my mom said to me. This is not in my book, but she also said, "If I had known I would be in so many poems, I would have lived differently."
I love that.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
I mean, let's get to some of my favorite funny parts too, and then there's a few more serious things to get to. I mean, this book covers all the emotions, all the range, but your mom's convertible, and I'm going to mention his athletic. You make fun of it. You're very fun, but he was a 3-sport letterman at a big high school, fairly big, in baseball, basketball, and football. All-American football, and at Grinnell College. He jokes, it's just D3, but it was All-American. He set all kinds of records, and he is in the Grinnell College Athletics Hall of Fame, Ed Hirsch.
Yeah, woo.
But sports was a big part of your life, and you were pretty good, weren't you?
Yeah. But I think the sports stories are funny.
How about your mom? This is your mom's convertible at the baseball. It was a game. It wasn't even a practice.
Yeah, my best friend was someone named Michael Grabowski, and he was the pitcher, and we were out carrying on, and we were late for the game. And I had borrowed my mother's convertible, so I decided to drive it from the school onto the field, the way you'd bring in a reliever. And so I just drove it across the field and parked it by the parking lot by the pitcher's mound so he could get out as if I were delivering him. And the coach didn't
go over too well. The coach
didn't go over, so he had us running laps, but he forgot and left the car there while we ran. Well, he was so mad that we were running laps. So yeah.
One of your other highlights, you have this group. It's kind of like a final project, big auditorium with all the students. You had to do a group research kind of paper project, and it was the commercialization of Christmas. And you walked up to the podium and said, give a little more backstory.
If anyone is upset about swear words, you should leave right now.
I think we can handle it, Ed.
Okay, yeah, well, we had done a project on the commercialism of Christmas. I was one of 5 people, and we had taken photographs of people like climbing over each other. No one liked these photographs. But anyway, I got the idea when I was coming onto the stage to call the project, "Does Santa Claus Fuck?"
How did that go over?
That went over very badly. Literally, by the time we left, the principal started getting incredible number of calls. And there's a group called Young Life. And Young Life was very, very offended. And my French teacher, Madame Lulegin, was unbelievably offended by my sacrilegious comment about Santa Claus. And she was so enraged by what I had said about Santa Claus that she not only failed me in French, but she went down to the admissions office to see if she could keep me from graduating. And then, because I had enough credits, she couldn't. When I was admitted to Grinnell, she called Grinnell College and tried to get them to rescind my scholarship. She spoke to the assistant athletic director, and she spoke to the registrar, and she talked to the financial aid office. Grinnell is a small place. When I took French, my teacher, Odette Delacluse, said, "Ce n'est pas bon." Yeah.
Translate that.
That's not good. It's not good. It's not good. Yeah, it offended a lot of people. For some reason, Santa Claus was treated as if he had been the savior, and I got suspended, and the principal was going to expel me, but my parents defended me, and he backed off, and my dad said, "What the fuck? Couldn't you find another word?" You got a big vocabulary. So the world went on. Mr. and Mrs. Claus went back to their family life.
Did you let your old French teacher know you were a Hall of Famer?
Yeah,
I let Grinnell.
I let that go. But I really had, I was a teenager. I really had no idea what I was doing. And I was just being provocative, but I really didn't think it would offend so many. I really didn't think it would offend so many people. And I was sorry. I was sorry I did, actually. I didn't mean to insult anyone's religion. I was just being provocative.
You were a great wiseacre, man, coming from that household.
Well, there was a review that said, I really did like this review, "He's still that guy." Yeah, so that's true.
Here's another Leany story, which I love. You had one class together. You were not in the same grade. You were a couple years apart. French class. Go.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful story.
So this is the same class with Madame Lulegin, and my friend Leif from elementary school had just an atrocious accent. And every time he would talk, I would turn around and give my sister a knowing look, because we'd known him since fourth grade. And there was a girl sitting between us named Joyce Glick. And in the book I say, she was a good detective. She said to Leany, "Are you dating Ed Hirsch?" And my sister said, "Actually, we live together."
Leany could keep up.
Yeah, she could throw down.
She could throw down.
She could throw down. I thought that was super funny. It's super.
Let's do a couple more fun ones, and there's a couple serious ones about Jewishness and Yiddishkeit, I think I'm saying. We'll get to that, but two of the jobs, you had some funny jobs, random jobs. Two of my favorites, your stint as a garbage collector and also working in the cardboard box factory. Do you want to tell those two?
Yeah, my parents were Depression-era mentality, so they were eager to push us out the door. And so I started working when I was 12. You're on the books or you're off the books. You ingratiate yourself. You work. And so I always had jobs. And one of the jobs when I was 15, well, my father sold corrugated cartons, so he was a box salesman. So I got a job at the box factory, working Christmas vacations and working summers like that. And I mean, I had a lot of mishaps because I wasn't so good at my job. But I was driving a forklift, and because they're huge boxes, massive. And so I was driving a forklift, and I was trying to get the boxes at the top, and I hit the sprinkler system. And so it was just a flood.
This is funny.
It was just a flood over all the boxes. And then, I still didn't get fired, even though I tried. I tried to get fired. And then
the garbage collecting.
One summer I worked as a garbage man in the village, and if you're raised as a middle class kid, you don't really understand. So I was riding on the back of the garbage truck, and I saw a girl I knew. I waved. Oh my God, you really learn how to be a nobody. That was cold. So I learned a lot, actually, because I worked with professionals, and I had a lot of trouble keeping up. And they said to me, "We hope you're good at school, because you're not so good at this." Because these guys had two jobs, and so in Skokie, if you were a garbage collector, if you did your full shift, your 8-hour shift in 5 hours, you could leave. So they did an 8-hour shift in 5 hours, and I just had trouble keeping up. And then, because they had another job, they'd go to other jobs. So yeah, I said it wasn't like my teachers at school. These guys taught me things. And they had an eye for, they were like antiques dealers. I had the eye for the good stuff.
You said they're always pulling stuff out,
they're
lamps and furniture.
Pulling out lamps, furniture. They knew it was good, and I just had no idea. And so you learn a lot, and it was I call it my freshman year in the school of shit jobs, and also it's a class in invisibility. You learn how people look through you, and so it was a kind of introduction to class for me and an understanding about class that I didn't really have before then.
Thank you for that. And we're going to get to audience questions in just a minute. We started maybe a minute late. The Jewishness, Yiddishkeit, which I'll ask you, I think I might be saying it correctly. I'll ask you to put your definition on it. But your relationship to your Jewish heritage, tradition, you're at Hebrew school class, and you skipped out every single time. You ducked out, you were like gallivanting around. You never went to class. And yet, Skokie, you do it. The other very serious and very journalistic part is the history of Skokie. And I came to learn, and you said you researched, 58% Jewish and 7,500 Holocaust survivors in that town. Talk about what Skokie meant and what your Jewishness means.
You're moving with your family. You don't really understand. You just go where your family goes, and I didn't really understand till I was writing this memoir that my parents were following Jewish migration patterns. Actually, my grandparents were. My grandparents, my grandfather worked on Maxwell Street, and they lived in a neighborhood called Logan Square. There were signs. When they went, my grandparents told me that there were signs on buildings when they first came that said, "No Jews or dogs allowed." In the book, I say that in the old country where my grandfather had come from, there were signs that said, "No Jews or devils welcome." So I go, in the new country, dogs are disruptive, but devils aren't a problem. And then my family moved to different northern neighborhoods, and then they moved to Skokie. And I was aware that there were a lot of Jewish people around, but I hadn't ever really been around Holocaust survivors. And European history seemed very far away, but you'd see someone walking down the street with a bag of bialys with numbers on his arm. And you go to Kaufman's Delicatessen, and you could see people with numbers on their arms. I go, you get a nosh and an insult in 5 languages. So that was a sort of recognition of something that I didn't really know about. And I didn't have, my parents were just, it was 2 generations. My grandparents who were strongly identified, and my parents who were just on the hustle and really wanted to assimilate and really wanted to make it into American life. And there was the conflict between that, between the older Jews who were just attached to some other country, some other world, and couldn't, my mother said about my grandfather, he never learned how to be an American in America. There's a line by Wallace Stevens, "We are as Danes in Denmark all day long." My grandfather was never like a Dane in Denmark, but my parents really wanted to be, and they're really assimilated. But they didn't have much feeling for the religion itself. It was a cultural life that was Jewish. So my mom belonged to this synagogue that I didn't like called Temple Sholem because it was so pretentious. So when I'd go to Sunday school, I would just get off the bus, walk through the school, go out the backyard, and then leave, and then go read on my own or hang around at the lake, or in grocery stores when it was in winter. And then on the bus ride back, my sister would teach me what she had learned in school. I go, It was like learning Hebrew. I got everything backwards. So, yeah. And then at Temple Sholem, you had to sign a contract that said you would go from being bar mitzvahed to being till you were 15 or 16. And so my friend Leif's father was a lawyer, and I took my contract to him to see if it was valid. And he goes, yeah, it's not valid, but my parents made me fulfill it anyway. So we're always strongly Jewish identified, but not religious. Later, I kind of concocted my own version of Judaism and culture, and I learned things like my grandfather would say, the Messiah is going to come, but he's taking a very long time to get here. And it wasn't until I read Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed that I learned that's where he'd gotten the idea. So, and my grandmother said, you're just like your grandfather. You think every lens grinder is Spinoza. So it was all part of it's very much part of the way, my identity and the way I am.
So your style of humor, do you mind being called a Jewish humorist
No,
like a lot of people do? Because I think it's also Irish humor, how you, in one sentence, in one line, the saddest, most tragic, and then the punchline, the swerve, the humor. That to me describes also Irish humor, or maybe other ethnic humor, but you find something distinctly Jewish in the way you compose
my version of dark humor is Jewish humor, but I think what you're pointing to is that all marginalized communities have used humor as a way to get through things. And so every minority culture has a very strong, humorous way of dealing with suffering. It's not an uncommon way that Italians, Irish, African Americans, and Jews, I mean, mine is Jewish because that's the way I grew up, but I think this way of coping, this way of understanding things, which my parents had and my grandparents had. My grandparents were a little different. My grandfather was wryer. The very first thing in the book after the prologue is I called it All Sales Are Final. God is like my old boss on Maxwell Street, my grandfather said. You may get home and discover that your new shirt doesn't have a back, but you're still not going to get a refund. So that was or once he said to me, he held up a can of tomatoes, and he said, how is this can of tomatoes different from God? So I said, God is fresh and not canned. He goes, no, God does not have an expiration date. So these are parables, whereas my parents are like street humor. But I think this kind of humor, this sort of dark humor, edgy humor, sometimes really sarcastic, sometimes poignant, often sad, I'd say melancholy, is just a way that people use to cope.
Right. And I mean, Chicago is so much through it. Since we got a great newspaper man, I'm still a newspaper man. You wrote a column for the Washington Post on poetry, but Mike Royko. I mean, who read Mike Royko? He was syndicated everywhere. I grew up in Tacoma, Seattle, Washington. He was syndicated in our paper. But talk about what Mike Royko meant. And also, real quick story, then raise your hand for audience, the 1968 Democratic Convention. And your family was a little divided on the long-term mayor of Chicago. So there's a couple of Chicago questions.
My dad loved Mayor Daley. And so in my house, the Oedipal conflict worked out around Mike Royko and Mayor Daley, because Mike Royko just constantly hit the machine and exposed the machine and wrote a book called Boss when I was in high school, which I loved. I could really get my dad's goat by reading Boss in my baseball uniform. Once we were driving and I was in the back, my dad was driving and I was reading Boss, and my dad was just getting more and more steamed. And finally he turned around and said, that uniform is filthy. The Mike Royko was my introduction, my understanding of Chicago politics, and I didn't really know, the controversy around Daley bubbled up around the convention, and it bubbled up in my family around the convention because I just thought that Mayor Daley was acting fascistic. But, to my dad, they were just beatniks. And my dad was a progressive Democrat, but he just didn't see it. So for me, the thing about the Democratic Convention is I had a job.
You missed the big show, right?
Yeah, I had a job, and so I missed it. And so I came, it was sort of, after it all happened, it was sort of embers and ashes, and you could sort of see what had happened, but history happened, I say in the book, history happened while I was on the job. But RICO was my understanding of what was happening in Chicago and how it worked. And I had no way of knowing that. And my father was old-fashioned, and my family was old-fashioned. They liked the way Daley had cleaned up the city and made it a beautiful city, and he, did tremendous things this way. But also, Chicago has a very American way of dealing with history. You just knock it down. And so, the reason that Chicago skyscrapers were invented in Chicago is because of the Chicago fire in 1871. That Chicago was just completely leveled, so you could just start from scratch. And there's always been that feeling.
So we do have audience questions. I know we can swear, we can cover any topic. Ed is game. You can throw down, as he likes to say. If you have Jen has a microphone. If you just raise your hand.
Hi. So in your book, you mix this, comedy, this darker comedy, with these very impactful emotional moments. But a lot of the time in other media, when you're trying to mix these things, they can sort of clash with each other and make the emotional moments feel hollow or the comedy out of place. How do you, while you're writing, sort of work to make sure that that doesn't happen, to try and balance the two with each other?
It's a really good question. Let me rephrase it. So you're saying the book really clashes when you move from tone to tone. And so why did you let that happen? This was something that I was very concerned about. It's a really good point. I was surprised myself at the way it worked, that it wasn't, that because I was keeping the same style, I always had a punchline or a turn, but they really often weren't funny. There's an early one called What Lasts, about my mother, Ruby and Irma. All their lives they carried the heat of first love plus the rage of early betrayal. It's to me like a line of poetry, just by itself. But what I found was the key thing here in terms of the tonalities has to do with the modulation of the pieces as they move from one to the next. And I think what you're talking about is it's too jarring. Like the story I was telling you about the court case, to suddenly put a joke in would have been just the wrong timing. It just would have been the wrong note. And so I guess what I would say is I was very concerned with the flow of the story and how it moved. And when I first wrote it, I wrote it without chapters. Then I divided into chapters. And then I divided the chapters into sections. So I would give I'd say more breathing room and more room to move to turn the tone so that you don't feel disconcerted by, you get the feeling all the time that there's a sadness underneath this story. But right from the beginning, you have, I think, a sense they're not all meant to be funny. But what I did like was it gave me the room to tell the anecdotes that were really funny, but then how you moved out of it was the key to keep the modulation and the movement. Because if you just had a book of all jokes, it would be very tiring. It wouldn't work. Like you can't, that would be just like an anthology of jokes. It's not like that. It really tries to create a story and to create a momentum as it goes.
That's a great question. Thank you. Who's next? Yeah.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about how you came to be a writer and how you came to be a poet?
It's a very generous question of you, by you. I guess I would say there are some breadcrumbs in the book that try to tell this. Like some of my friends were saying to me, you tell this story and then suddenly you become a poet. It's just going to seem so random. Like, how did that happen? I guess there are two main things that are actually in the book that describe, sort of point towards my future life. One was my grandfather used to take me to a bookstore called Shashinsky's Bookstore on the north side of Chicago, where he liked to hang out with his cronies. And I once said to him, there are a lot of books in different languages, and they were dusty, and I couldn't understand them. And I said, why do you like it here so much? And he said, this is my other family. And he used to write things in the backs of his books. And we never knew what he was writing, but we had a sense it might be poetry when he was babysitting for us. He seemed to go to another world, and I wanted to go there too. But after he died, when I was in high school and I started writing poetry, I went to my grandmother and asked what had happened to his books, and she said she had given them all away to a Jewish charity. So no one knew what he was doing. So that's one part that was sort of laid the idea. But then the second part was when I was a sophomore in high school, I suddenly started crying all the time. I just would burst out crying. I say in the book, this was very unbecoming for a football player. I cried into my eye black every time we lost a football game for 4 years. I called that the sorrow of manly sports. I would just suddenly start crying. And I feel now I probably was mourning for my childhood, but I'm not really sure because I couldn't have articulated it. And so I started writing things down, and I wrote them down in lines, and I called it poetry. I didn't really know anything about poetry, but I just out of, I would say, emotional desperation, I began writing things. And they didn't make a lot of sense. I wrote a poem, I called it Shine On, about turtle wax. And my sister didn't understand it, and I got mad at her because I didn't understand it either. And then in the book, I said I decided to punish her by not letting her read my poetry anymore. I go, what a masochist. She loved the punishment. So I just started writing out of desperation, I guess. Then, outside the scope of my book, when I went to college, when I was a freshman at Grondahl, I brought my poems to my freshman humanities teacher, whose name was Carol Parsons. And she changed my life, really, because what Carol said to me, in essence, was, you could be a poet. You have the passion, and you have the imagination, and you have the intelligence. But what you're writing is not poetry. You're just writing down your feelings. You're not trying to make anything. And that the oldest word for poetry in Greek is poiesis, which means making, and a poem is a made thing. And so if you want to be a poet, you have to try and make something. And you can't make something without reading something. And so you have to read poetry to understand poetry, try and write poetry. Now, she said later that she knew right away that I would take to it, but I'm not so sure about that. But anyway, I did. I would go and read things. I highly recommend this, by the way. I had never heard of anyone, and whenever someone mentioned a poet, I would go and read them. And then you do that for 50 years, you learn a lot. But one night, I had a poet named Gerard Manley Hopkins. I'd never heard of him. He was a freshman. And I read one of these poems. They're called The Terrible Sonnets. And one of them begins, I wake and feel the fell of dark, not day. What hours, what black hours we have spent this night. What sights you, heart, saw, ways you went, and more must, and yet longer lights delay. With witness I speak this. But where I say hours, I mean years, mean life. And my lament is cries countless, cries like dead letters sent to dearest him who lives, alas, away. I am gall, I am heartburn, and so on. And it just went right through me. I just had never read anything like that. It's as if Hopkins had articulated some desolation that I felt inside myself but couldn't name. I wake and feel the fell of dark, not day. It's like it's supposed to be morning, but it's not. What hours, oh, what black hours we have spent this night. What ways you heart saw, ways you went, and more must in yet longer lights delay. And then he goes, with witness I speak this. But where I say hours mean years, he's allegorizing, mean life. And my lament is cries countless, cries like dead letters sent to dearest him who lives, alas, away. It's as if God has some postal delivery system that you'll never reach. And I was looking at this thing that it articulated in my desolation, and I go, holy cow, this thing is a sonnet. He didn't just write this out the way I'm writing my poems. He made this thing. And it seemed incredibly generous to me. And then later, when I was writing how to read a poem, and I was in my late 40s now, this became a kind of idea for the way that poetry operates. Like, here I am, a Jewish kid from Chicago in a dorm room in Iowa in 1968. And here's Gerard Manley Hopkins in the 1850s, an Anglican priest, at 3 removes, he called them, in Ireland. And he writes a poem that I find more moving, more articulate, more defining of my own emotional life than anything anyone else has ever said to me. This seems the mystery of poetry. And I go, I want to be like that. I want to be with these people. And so that's kind of how it happened. I thought, this is for me.
Is that Hopkins in your list of 100 that'll break your heart?
He is.
I bet.
He is, yeah. Not that one.
No.
Thou art, the one that's in my in 100 poems to break your heart is, thou art indeed just, Lord. But so I contend, it's an argument with God.
So I think we have time for one more question.
Really? We're just getting
sorry.
going.
If nobody's in a big rush, we usually try to, let's keep it going.
Yeah.
You ready? You throw down, Ed?
Totally.
Let's throw down. All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi, were you in Skokie when the Nazis came to parade?
I had gone to college, so I wasn't there when that happened, but that's how most people know Skokie. That was the question?
Okay.
The point of the Nazi, it is related because I was already gone, but the point of the Nazi march in Skokie was because there were so many Holocaust survivors there. It was very pointed. You go to where there are more Holocaust survivors than anywhere else in the United States, and you march as Nazis. That's what it was about.
Thank you. Yes.
Oh yeah, just I have 2 things. One, light here. Growing up in Chicago, were you a White Sox or Cubs?
Great question.
I'm not going to tell you because I want you to buy the book.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Well, yeah.
There you go.
I'm following my mother's.
Yes.
I'm following my mother because if you're a Sox fan, you're not going to get it.
Now, let me ask you one other thing. I didn't know of you until this morning when my friend here said, why don't you come and you'll find this interesting.
Thanks for sharing.
All right. So I Googled your name.
Yeah, okay.
And it said AI generated. It was something that was AI generated, talking about your philosophy of education. And I read 2 sentences, and it threw out all these concepts and everything, and I read it, and I read it again, and I said, I don't know what it said. So I'd like to ask you, what is your opinion of AI-generated whatever comes out of the, you know, the
How complimentary was it?
it was neither. It was neither. It had no feeling at all.
This is a whole semester lecture,
Yeah.
Ed, but jump in.
All I'll say is that what I think is happening is it's just organizing information from the internet and spitting it out at a very rapid pace. And so it's going to tell you, it's very good at summarizing what things are being said on the internet, but those things are often unsourced.
Oh, we have, Mike Huber will tell you a story later, attributing poems to the wrong poet,
Yeah.
making quotes I never said in my
Yeah.
mouth and things. Yeah, it's terrible.
So I mean, I think that it's wildly inaccurate. I mean, it's amazing the way it operates, but it's inaccurate because it's unvetted. So if someone goes on your Wikipedia site and says something that's inaccurate, it then becomes part of the generative machine that AI is, because there's no person morally thinking through what this is or whether it's accurate or not. So it's kind of miraculous at how much it can summarize. But what it's basically doing, is my guess is, it's just summarizing things that I've said from different interviews, or that that people have quoted from How to Read a Poem, and then they're generating what an educational philosophy is my guess is that's what's
Without
happening.
compensation for the author or the poet,
Yeah.
the original thinker. But that's
But
another.
I really could have learned, done without your telling me you never heard of me. Yeah, that was.
Hey, honesty,
Yeah,
come
yeah,
on,
that
man.
was okay. I can live with it, but
Are
really,
you going to get a passport? Are you going to make the first one to 10
Yeah.
events? Yes, he is.
I think you get 2 stamps for coming tonight.
Yeah, give him 2.
'Cause
Janet, give him 2
you
stamps.
never heard of me. You get 2 stamps. Yeah.
Who's got another question? Ed's just warming up.
That was fun.
Wait, she's coming around. Yep.
Hi, I wanted to ask you about your book, Gabriel. How did you decide to do the tercet, the 3 lines? And like, how difficult was it to carry that through an entire book? And was your motivation like to kind of like a book of discovery about your son, or to more share grief?
So, for those who don't know, my poem Gabriel it's called Gabriel, a Poem. It's a book-length poem about my son Gabriel, who died at the age of 22. I guess the short version of this is that when Gabriel died, I was in such shock that I couldn't really work. I've always worked, I've had a job my whole life, as you know from talking to me. And so I took a leave of absence from my job, and I moved down to Atlanta, where my then partner, now my wife, lives. And there I was in Atlanta. I didn't know what to do every day. Like, suddenly I'm alone. What am I going to do every day? So I decided I would write a biography of Gabriel. And I'd go to a coffee shop every day, and I would just talk to my ex-wife, Janet, and talk to my sisters, and talk to my friends, and talk to Gabriel's friends, to try and get it straight, like what had happened, all the medications, all the schools, it was just a blur. And so I wrote it all down for like 5 months. And I had a document. It was like 150 pages. And I showed it to Lori, and she said, I don't know what you're asking me, but dude, you're not a memoirist, which is kind of sobering now that I've published a memoir. But she goes, this is not a book. This is like, you left yourself out of it. This is just a document. But maybe you want to write some poems out of it. You've got it all here. So I went back to New York. I didn't do any events for a year. No lectures, no talks, so I had more time than I usually have because I wasn't going around at all. I wasn't teaching or anything. I started writing some poems based on my document. And I suddenly felt nauseated. in all my books of poems, like you'll have an elegy for your father, and you'll have a poem about work, and you'll have poems about different subjects. But the idea of having some poems about Gabriel mixed in with other poems suddenly seemed intolerable to me. So I feel like I had to either go all out or not. And the question is, going all out is like, do you have the guts to do it? And you're going to say things that Gabriel's not going to like, your ex-wife's not going to like. You're going to tell the story or not. And I decided that I wanted to try to write more poems to try and capture not just what happened, but what Gabriel was like. And so I hit upon unpunctuated style right away because he was so spontaneous, he was so impulsive. And then I got the idea that it's not unrelated to my memoir, but it's a tragedy. It's an elegy. It's not a comedy. But I realized that instead of making Gabriel sound like poetry, I should make poetry sound like Gabriel and his friends, and that I'd never seen a kid like Gabriel in a poem before. And so I decided to try and get down what Gabriel was like. And at first I was just writing unpunctuated lines, and then they were going too fast. And so that's when I hit upon tercets, or 3-line stanzas, because each stanza had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it could be like a haiku, or they could carry on. And I figured out that you could do 10 3-line stanzas, and each one would be like a little section. And it would be like, the book would be a book-length poem, but each one would be its own sort of quasi-poem. And it would go really fast. It would hurtle at you the way Gabriel was. And it would turn fast the way Gabriel turned. And I liked the way it captured him and the way it captured information. And then I guess the final piece related to this, sorry to go on, but you asked. The final piece related to this book was, the whole time I was writing Gabriel, I was aware that it's a father's book, and I wanted to honor the story. But I also wanted to acknowledge that I'm not the only person that this has happened to. I'm not the only person who's suffered this way. There's a common thread that people suffer, but I didn't know how to do it. Like, I didn't know how to acknowledge it until I got the idea of calling on my people, that is, other poets. And I started thinking of other poets who'd lost children and how they'd coped with it and what they'd done. And there's a kind of leitmotif through the book, and the same 3-line stanza tend to a section about poets who'd lost their children, and then also poets as parents. News is not good there. And how they'd coped and what they'd written and how they'd done it. And that's a kind of leitmotif through the book. That's a kind of, I'd say, like a chorus of grief. And I was writing it to capture Gabriel and what Gabriel was like, with the acknowledgement that other people have suffered like this. And I couldn't write about all those people, so I wrote about poets. And one of the surprises of the book, and one of the most moving things about the book to me, is it's found a lot of people who've lost children. And I now know a tremendous number of people who've lost children and who the book has been meaningful to me. I didn't write it for that reason, but it's been a tremendous consolation to me that various people have found it. I guess the way it's related to our conversation here in particular is that I had to write a different way. I had to find a new style, a different style, in order to write about Gabriel. And it's different than the way I'd written poetry before. And I feel I had to do the same thing with My Childhood in Pieces. I had to find another way to tell the story, because the way I was doing it wouldn't have been able to enable this particular group of people, this particular world that I was writing about. And in My Childhood in Pieces, it's a stand-up comedy, but I also realized that the world that I'm writing about is completely gone, and that's why it's also an elegy.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question. A very generous answer. Thank you, Ed.
Hi, Eddie. Question. I was brought up in Brooklyn, so I had a Jewish upbringing, and I think we should all be in therapy. Did you ever go to therapy like your sister, did you ever go to therapy? And if not, why not? Considering your childhood.
Our audience throws you the hard balls, Ed.
Freud says that an eldest Jewish son who has his mother's love always goes through life feeling like a conqueror. And I say in my book, I would add that the conqueror has a guilty conscience and a host of symptomatic illnesses and a desperate sense of humor. And then I also say, what sort of conqueror reads Freud? Yeah, I never thought of therapy. Wasn't my way. I'm sure there's a therapeutic, I don't think of writing poetry as therapeutic, but I'm sure there's a therapeutic or expressive element in it that helped me come to terms with it. But related to that, I do think that when I hit upon this method of writing my childhood in pieces, it was really the only way that I had access to what had happened to me as a child. And I told a lot of stories, but I'd never been able to write them because the method that I was using to write poetry wasn't going to get me to this. And somehow this method that I hit upon by quoting my family and then imitating it opened up my whole childhood for me. And I think that's as close to therapy as you could get. Although my wife really likes my book, but she goes, no wisdom here. The thing I think that's different about my memoir from other memoirs, and also different than therapy, is the book doesn't try to look back at what happened with some kind of distance and understanding, the way most memoirs do. Most memoirs take a sort of attitude towards the past and trace the kind of growth, spiritual, psychological growth, and lessons that you learn. My book tries to catapult you back into the past. It like throws you back there. And Gabriel tries to do this too, so that you're experiencing it as it happens, as if it's in the present tense. And this way, I love the immediacy of this, but it doesn't have a reflective quality. It has which I think probably therapy does. I'm not against therapy. I'm all for it, but it hasn't been my way. But this way of writing about my childhood was as close as I could get to processing what happened.
So I would remind you, Bookhouse is still in the lobby. There's back copies. Gabriel they had copies. And this book, incredible book, Ed, My Childhood in Pieces. I hope you get a chance to line up and sign it afterwards. Make sure you get a passport, get it stamped. You're getting 2 stamps, sir, for that question. And I'll take the privilege of the last question, since you're Chicago, longtime Brooklyn now. You only get 1 slice. Deep dish or New York style? Or New York style? Where are you going now, Ed?
I think
this could really get you in trouble, man. This is being recorded.
I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any trouble. I mean, I'm loyal to my roots. I'm loyal to my roots. So in Chicago, we invented, smoke-filled rooms, political deals, and deep dish pizza. So that's where I am.
He's Edward Hirsch, Grinnell College Hall of Fame All-American, and a tremendous poet. Big hand for Ed.